Welcome to this week's In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director of Whitewater Community Television, and very glad you're able to join us for this conversation that we will have this evening. A couple of things to remind you of. There is still time for you to get an absentee ballot. So if you're planning on voting and you don't want to go out and do that, it is still possible to get an absentee ballot. If you need information, there is some on the screen about that. The polling places will be open, not at the same time that they would. Normally there would be 2 Saturdays where you would have a chance to go to either the Coleman Center or the courthouse and vote. You're down to 1 day to be able to do that. That information is also on the screen. And then, of course, the vote centers will be open, and those locations are also available on the screen for you so that you know where you can go if you want to go vote in person. But again, if you want an absentee ballot, the deadline is coming up on that. And also, if you have ever thought about being a poll worker, this might be the year to do it. Because of COVID-19, a lot of the normal poll workers who would be there are trying to socially distance themselves in. They're trying to quarantine themselves. So Wayne County is in a position where it is really in need of poll workers. So if you want to consider that, call the clerk's office, talk to them, and they'll get you set up for that. All of that information also appears on the screen for you. It would be really great to be able to help out the Wayne County area if you're able to be a poll worker. Today's conversation, our starting conversation, and might be our only one, we aren't quite sure yet, we'll see how far we go with this, is with Phil Stevenson, who is, you still have the title, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Superintendent of Centerville-Abingtong Schools. He has been part of the Centerville-Abingtong School District for some 48 years as a teacher and an administrator. There was no way we were going to get through this lineup of In Focus programs without talking to at least one superintendent. And if we were going to talk to one, we should talk to the dean. We should talk to the guy who has been here the longest out of any of our current superintendents and find out what's going on. I do have to add the disclaimer. Phil Stevenson is a member of the Whitewater Community Television Board of Directors, and I'm very glad that he is. As a matter of fact, I first met him when I was asked to serve on the United Way Board of Directors some years ago when he was a member of that board. And it was good to get to know him then. We're not best of friends by any stretch of the imagination, but I always enjoy the conversations that I have with him. So Phil, thank you very much for agreeing to do this conversation with me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I guess it's safe to say that if you look back on your first year, even as a superintendent, let alone as a teacher, and look at this year, the two things look completely different. Let's, before we go way off the rails here as I can sometimes, talk a little bit about what this school year has been like from your perspective. I know when it started back in August, you never expected May and June to be what it is.
No, and when I started back in August, I hadn't decided I was going to retire either. I really thought I could maybe make it at least to 50 years. But, by October, I knew that I was running out of gas and that we need to get some younger ones in. And all the superintendents around are much younger than me. And when we hit December and we already had a snow day out, those snow days kill you. You know, you're getting up around 4 in the morning, drive around at about 4:30, and this year particularly we had an early one in December, and then we had some others in January. And I'd already announced my retirement before Thanksgiving, but that really reaffirmed that it's time for me to get out. And I feel bad for my wife, who she has to get up too, because, I'm up and running around, and you're texting all the various superintendents and calling them and trying to compare notes on what they have in their areas and make decisions. So then we turn around, finishing most of the bad weather in February, and then here March hits, and then we start having the virus. And we met with the health department, the superintendents did, and they said, well, with spring break coming up, we better sit out a couple of weeks after spring break and let the virus disappear. And the next week, they announced that we were going to be out. The governor announced we were going to be out even a week before our spring break. And so for 3 weeks there, we were kind of in a dead pattern. But then they announced we were going to start doing e-learning. We had already prepared to do e-learning, kind of like Richmond and Northeastern. Hagerstown was already doing it. We were going to miss 3 days, 3 snow days, and then after that, we were going to do e-learning after those 3 days. So we were prepared. We'd already completed in-service for the teachers getting ready for e-learning. The problem was trying to get to the elementary students, not iPads, but their laptops. We use laptops down to grades 2. And so we got those distributed, and down at kindergarten and first and second grade at Rose Hamilton, they passed out paper packets. And that's what we've been doing since. The first thing we noticed, besides the e-learning process that we put in, was almost immediately we had to find a way to feed students. And we had never done that before. Centerville, we never were eligible to do it. You have to have more than 50% students on free and reduced lunch. We're about 40. So we worked with communities and schools to arrange for the churches to come up and get donations and all that. We gave extra food that we had in our cafeteria that we couldn't use, that you couldn't store for a long while. And then about 4 weeks later, the state loosened those requirements. And so we have volunteers come in, cook the food, and distribute it once a week up at the Centerville Christian Church in the evening. So that's worked out real well. Again, that was something new we had to think about, and it's been heavily used. We've been distributing a lot of food from our kitchens, and that's worked out real well. We've been doing real well with e-learning. I had a principals meeting yesterday, and the principals had to report out. We're averaging anywhere from 90 to 96% participation rate, which is really good.
Wow.
Probably better than we get during a regular school day. But, I've been shocked by it, but I think the kids are thinking, what else is there to do? And the parents have been really good about getting the kids to do their work. The teachers, of course, have had to resort to a lot of Zoom meetings. Everybody kind of just does their own individual thing, but the principals are keeping an eye on it, keeping touch, and we really haven't had too many issues. Like some of them have said, some of the kids get rowdy on the Zoom meetings, and because you don't always see what they're doing, so you hear noises and stuff like that. But for us, it hasn't been too bad. And so it's gone real well. But yeah, who would have known that we were going to be out like this? And the big issue right now in discussion's been graduation.
Right.
And Wednesday night at the school board meeting, we probably spent 45 minutes on how to do graduation, because it seems like every time when you have a plan, we had a plan that was approved a month ago by the health department, Wayne County Health Department. They said it would work. Then the state came out and said you can't do it that way. So every time you plan something, it seems like you turn around and then somebody tells you can't anymore, because this thing is so fluid and ever changing. You never know. Well, now they've loosened it up again. So it does look like we're going to, and I think Richmond's got a similar plan. They're still going to go ahead and have the graduation at normal time, which for us would be May 31st. I think Richmond's the same date.
Yes.
We're going to allow the kids to go at this point into the building individually with their families, and then they'll get a diploma, walk out, and then we're going to have a parade of all the seniors through the town. And they can have their pictures taken outside and inside, and as long as they keep apart. So I think it's still not going to be like a graduation, but it's going to be close to it.
So the plan for your seniors is that they will be able to go into the building on that day, on May 31st, with their families and do that. That's going to kind of be a live event.
Yes, that's our plan. And we'll live stream it. I don't know exactly how that will look, but they're working out the technology on that. Our auditorium is accessible by a back door into the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking to have up to 25 people in there. I think we're looking at having 10 parents with the students or relatives. They'll go in that back door, walk in, go across the stage, receive their diploma, take their pictures. We'll take their pictures, we'll film it, and then they can walk out. So I think we're going to do that. We don't have the number that Richmond has. They have probably 200 or 300 graduating. This class is particularly small. We only have 92. When usually, lower grades, we have around 140, something like that. So I think we're able to do a little more that way. Some of the schools are looking to delay it until July 26th, I believe, and some of the other neighboring schools. But a lot of kids have already left then. We have military kids going to the military that are leaving right away. They'll miss it if we wait. And so we're going to try to do this. No plan is going to please everybody. We know that.
Sure.
This was the discussion. So the board, we had a really good discussion. They brought up many issues, and Mr. McCoy is working on that right now, or Dr. McCoy. He's our high school principal and soon to be superintendent. And so he's working on it. And so hopefully by next Wednesday, we'll have more information on the details and so on. We're going to take it back to the board for trying to look at different things that we can do better and still be within the guidelines provided by the Wayne County Health Department and whatever comes from Indiana Department of Education.
I know that you said that you've had really good participation from your students when it comes to participating in the e-learning. I'm curious, has there been any concern, any talk about how students, particularly in some of the lower grades, are really getting their lessons done, how they move forward? How do you make a second grader, a third grader, a third grader, a fourth grader? How do you know that your seniors have really kind of gotten what they need in order to be able to graduate? I mean, this has been almost half the school year has kind of been in this really strange environment. Has there been any discussion, any concern about that at all?
Yeah, a lot of the concern, especially at the higher levels, to go over a lot of new material is very difficult. A lot of it is just going over what they've already had, because delivering the new material is very difficult to explain. Now, some organizations have stepped up for kids can call them, and like some of the colleges and so on, and get help. The Retired Teachers Association, they have a hotline that you can call them for help. And of course, our teachers are on standby too, but a lot of times, maybe they're working on homework in the evenings when their parents come home. So yes, it's difficult, but what I'm hearing is that a lot of it is, it's hard to introduce new material in a lot of the courses. And so a lot of it's going over the material they've already covered before. So yes, that's an issue.
I know that you mentioned it's fluid and ever changing, and I do realize that. And it's not something you have to completely worry about. But what are the discussions so far about what next year looks like?
Oh, well, no one knows what next year is going to look like. We're not going to receive any guidance from the governor until July. And we don't know if we're going to open or not. There's a lot of feeling saying that, how can you put kids on a bus and haul them into school? We don't know if we're going to have to supply masks for all of them. And all the schools have been ordering masks right now like crazy. We've got huge orders in. We've asked for 3,000. Some schools have asked for 6. I'm not sure if we're going to have to provide masks for the students. We're not sure what the buses are going to look like. I've heard some schools talk about they may go half days for half the kids, half days for another half. They may have to shorten the instructional time down. I've also heard that they may have to do, considering doing a kind of a, some kids will come to school, some kids may choose to stay home. We're not sure how this is going to, so we may have e-learning for some kids and actually be in the classrooms for others. So until we get more direction from the state, I know they're passing out, like today, I've gotten several things from different organizations saying these are options that you can look at. But truthfully, until we really know what guidance is from the state, Indiana Department of Education, the governor, we probably don't know really where we're at. This is just starting May. With everything going on and a lot of the businesses loosening up, maybe we will be able to start back the way we want. But I'm not sure what will happen if several kids get the virus or if the teachers get the virus, the adults.
Right.
What is going to be the result? You're going to shut down the school, clean it. It's just a hard thing to even try to predict right now, because I wouldn't have predicted back in March that we would not be back in school. Right now is the time when, and it's really bad for the kids. There's no athletics. The education is all but stopped, except for e-learning. You're still not getting the classroom feel that you get when you're actually there. And of course, the seniors lose out on everything that they have here at the end, and it's hard to replicate that when you can't do everything normal. And I'm not sure how you're going to be able to do it this fall. It's just going to be very difficult to open up, and then somebody catches it, and then, the whole room has to be quarantined. I mean, I don't know how it goes. And then, of course, the high school and junior high, your classes are fluid, and the hallways are packed. It's just, it is going to take a lot of planning. So right now, we've got a new superintendent, Dr. McCoy, and the school board wanted to know at the last meeting what our transition plan was. And I said, right now, we're just trying to finish up the year and plan for what it takes we have to get back all of our textbooks and computers before the end of the year. Our last day is officially May 15th.
That's coming
and we're
up
trying
quick.
to figure out, how are we going to get them back in? And then the kids are wanting materials out of their lockers and stuff. So we worked on that this week. We're going to, after May 15th, we're going to have everything bagged up. They can pick it up, and then we'll collect their books and their computers at that time. So it's a lot of things that we never thought of, and a lot of things we're still running across that we're just thinking of every day because things pop up. So I think really with the participation rate, the students have really done a great job picking up on it. I'm sure the parents have been very involved with that. Not many kids will just work on things voluntarily. I mean, you'd like to think they are hungry for an education, but and then of course our teachers and our staff and administrators. We've had a lot of teachers, staff, cooks volunteering to cook, distribute food, and it's really great to see that working together within the community. So, in some ways it's been good to bring communities together, but, it's been a rough way to go to do that. But,
you and I have had a chance to talk on a couple of occasions when you've been able to come into the studio and do this. And we've had a couple of times over the last couple of years where you and some other superintendents have come in, sat around and talked. And one of the strong points that have come out of those conversations have been how here in Wayne County and Indiana as a whole, but particularly in some of the smaller areas, the schools are still the focal point in a lot of these communities. I think this situation maybe has has driven that home even more.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And then the other side of the coin is the state's going to be hurting for money with the delay in your taxes, property taxes, and so on. For instance, we know that we're not going to have enough money to make it through July 1st because of property tax delays and distribution. So we are back to using what they're called tax anticipation warrants, where we borrow money to get through until the taxes come in. The state is saying that we will be fully funded until the end of this year, which would be December. There's many of us that think that won't happen. I think it could be a possibility in November. They'll start cutting back on what we get. And that's because of all the delays. And they run largely off of income tax and sales tax for school funding, for half our school funding for education. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Now, when I first became superintendent, it wasn't unusual for the state to cut our funding during the year. So I've kind of lived through that. But these young ones have not. And so it's gonna be a challenge to keep full employment within the schools. I hate to say it, but somewhere you've got to make cuts. One of the suggestions that came out from the Chamber of Commerce yesterday was that they need to look at consolidating services and everything, which means consolidating schools. So yes, it brings your communities together, but then with this type of thing, they're going to say, well, why aren't we looking to merge school districts? And of course,
we've had that discussion in the studio also, and I've seen the daggers come flying at me when it was thrown on the table. So I'm glad I'm not the one who first brought that up in this discussion.
So I think everybody knows my feelings on that. I'm sure, one thing about it is if they do find a vaccine and things get back to normal, hopefully then the funding will get straightened around. And, it wasn't back in October, November, everybody was saying, we need more money for salaries and teacher salaries and all that. That's all been out the window for right now. I hope they do look at it again, because it needs to be done. It's hard to find teachers right now. And we have a lot of teachers, a lot of districts. We're not too bad, Centerville, but our teachers are teaching on emergency licenses. They don't even have a license. They're just, getting emergency licenses. How
do you do that? Explain that to the emergency license situation.
Well, it's like if you might have somebody that has a college degree and they would like to start teaching. So you have to have so many hours, but it may not be in the subject that your license that you want to teach. We're really short in math and English, and special ed's another one. And so then they go and get a emergency license, and then they have so many years to get the license, like 2 years, 3 years. They have to have a plan with the university. So it's not new. It's not a new thing. We've been using it for a long while, but we're seeing more people using emergency licenses because they can't find people with a real license to fill in the classrooms.
You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're talking with Phil Stevenson, Superintendent of Centerville-Abingtong Schools. Talk a little bit about, if you would, what got you started in teaching? Was it a person, an experience? And considering the way we hear, and this goes back to what we were just talking about having it hard to find teachers. How do you encourage young people to go into that profession right now? How do you give them that drive? How do you let them know that it is a profession, a career that they can go into, that they can be proud of? That's got to be maybe a little bit tougher in these days.
Yeah, I'll ask students, and I'll in the office or You know, in the hallways, I'll say, you know, the seniors, are you thinking about being a teacher? And it's hard to find anybody that will say yes. They would rather go into another field because, you know, for a lot of people, it's money. But for teaching, you have to have really desire to enjoy students and enjoy your subject matter. And it's really a personal thing to be a teacher. A lot of students would rather go into another area that maybe earns more money and has more respect or that kind of thing. For me, I grew up on a farm and in a family business, so I was wanting to do that. But when I was a senior, we had a high school principal. His name was Carl Hilton, and I wanted to be like him. I was class president and worked with him, and I got to be principal for a day. I liked that. And so I started getting interested in wanting to be a teacher. So when I graduated, then I had changed my whole focus. And of course, a lot of small businesses like our family had were going to be shutting down anyway. But so I went to Ball State from the start wanting to be a teacher, and I wanted to be a principal. That was my ultimate goal. I never really wanted to be a superintendent. But so I started teaching at Centerville in 1972 in social studies, and we were going to change the world. And at that time, you didn't have too much regulation on how you taught or what you taught. And we had a good principal, Jim Howe, and he let us pretty much do what we wanted. And the whole school was almost all young because the World War II teachers were retiring by that time. And so learning was fun then. You didn't have all your testing going on, and there was a lot of things you could do. And so I taught for 13 years until 1985, and I knew our high school assistant principal was getting ready to retire, so I went back to school and got my license. In 85, I became assistant principal and was assistant principal for 8 years. And then I was lucky enough to follow when Jim Howe retired. He'd been there 26 years as principal. So I followed him, and I was there for 12 years as principal. And then they asked me to be superintendent. And so that's how I ended up being in there. Like I told you before the show, I had the privilege of being the Teacher Association president for 5 years. And that gave me a perspective of being on both sides of the fence. Right now, a lot of your administrators are administrators for 3-5 years, or teachers for 3 to 5 years. They become administrator. I taught for 13, and then 5 of those years I was Teacher Association president. And I got to know the issues of all the buildings from K through 12. And this helped me out a lot later when I was superintendent. I was also assigned to Rose Hamilton for 9 weeks in 1988 as principal, because that principal had a heart attack. And I enjoyed it at Rose Hamilton Elementary. I'm just not an elementary person. I was glad to get back to the high school. I'm not a big, fan of little kids. But anyway, I couldn't wait to get back to the high school kids. I really like the high school. But principal, I really liked. Teacher, I really liked. Assistant principal, you have to deal with the discipline. I did not like. I don't enjoy disciplining people, kids. And superintendent has been a struggle because you have the weight of everything on you. I mean, you can't just say, well, I'll send that over to the superintendent, because there's nowhere else to send it to the buck stops here. And when I first started, we had a lot of different issues, and I didn't know if I could even make it 3 years, but I did. So it lasted longer than I thought, but it's been an enjoyable experience, and I've really enjoyed being at Centerville. I've had the staff and so on, the teachers I worked with over the years have been great. From being my experience as association president, I involve the association leaders in everything. Even right now when we have our principal meetings, I've got two of the association leaders right there in the meetings with us discussing e-learning or everything, because I want that teacher perspective there, and how we're addressing the issues of e-learning and how we do professional development with different things. I want them there, and I want them to be in the discussion. So they're right there with the principals, and it works out very well.
You've had a chance to see a number of different changes, so I'm going to go ahead and try to pick your brain. You're watching In Focus, by the way, on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're talking with Phil Stevenson, Superintendent for another 2 months, maybe, of Centerville-Abingtong schools. We've talked a little bit about the lack of teachers. Talk about how we can make that better. Is it just pay that teachers need? Is it support? And is that from a state level, a federal level? How, in your mind, truly, how would that work best? Because Centerville-Abingtong is not on an island alone. Everybody's having problems getting teachers. A lot of teachers feel really kind of put upon. I think you've been around long enough that you would say teaching is different now than it was then. Teachers are asked to do more in a classroom, be more involved with students' personal lives. Talk a little bit about what we need to do to build that profession up, because it is incredibly important.
Well, and pay is one thing, because it is an attraction. You know, we've got teachers that they're working 2 different jobs, and so pay is one, but it's a lot different. You know, you talk about how it was when I started teaching. You're right. You didn't need the support mechanisms that you do now. You know, we have communities and schools. We have social workers. We need more guidance counselors. And a lot of the things that I hear going on that my principals are facing and the teachers are facing, I just never faced back in the 1970s and 80s. And when I talk to principals and they tell me some of the things and conversations they have had with parents, it's just a lack of general respect in many ways. And it's tough to get respect from kids now too. Back in the day, it was more easily done, and it's tough to get that now. But I still work with students through model legislature, and I tend to keep doing that. So every year I do work with students still, and it's a teaching activity. And, you know, some of these kids just don't know where the line is. You know, back in the 70s and 80s, the kids knew where the line was. They didn't cross it. But these kids now, they're back and forth across that line all the time. And I think that the type of parents that we have in many cases that are coming into the buildings too, we're dealing with a lot more grandparents raising kids, kids that are homeless. We have a full-time, you know, one of our Rose Hamilton principal just deals with homeless situations, and that would have been unheard of 20 years ago. And a lot of your older people in Centerville, because I'm in the Lions Club and we're all pretty old, you know, they're surprised when they hear those type of things. You mean there's homeless in Centerville? Yes, there's homeless in Centerville. And so the type of social issues we're dealing with, it creeps into the classroom, and there's no way to really avoid it. And just like the amount of food that we're distributing, it shocks a lot of people that we have that much food being distributed. And the numbers I'm seeing from Hagerstown, Northeastern, and Cambridge of the amount of food that's being distributed is really unbelievable. And it's a lot of it's because this has happened so fast. So many people have lost their jobs that it's out there anyway. Right. So, you know, you said 40% free and reduced lunch. That's still
a pretty big number compared to where it was 15, 18 years ago.
That's right. And then when you go to Richmond, that's 90, or Cambridge City, where it's 70 or 80. Yeah, well, Dr. Borf used to kid me. I'd say, well, our free and reduced lunch has doubled in the last 20 years. He goes, yes, but it's still only 40%. And that's true. But yeah, it's been a big impact for us. So we've had to increase the number of social workers. We've really put a lot of support into our communities and schools program. And of course, you know, I'm a big supporter of that. But it's been very necessary. So even before this all happened, we were still sending a lot of food home on Fridays for weekends for students through communities and schools. And so, yes, that has changed too. I've been lucky with my son and daughter are both in education, and that doesn't always happen. You know, you talk to some kids that their parents are educators, they go, there's no way I'd be in education. So it is, my wife was an elementary teacher. So we've all kind of got into that, but, and both my son and daughter are administrators now too, a principal and assistant principal, but it's tough to get the young people interested in it. And they see what's going on in the classrooms and see how much time it's in it. And, you know, that's another thing. It's the time. So if you're really working hard as a teacher, you're in there working on weekends and you're working at night grading papers. And a lot of people just don't want to put that much time into it anymore. And I think that's another thing. And my son, he was joking the other day. He said, yeah, I never really got to know my dad until I was in high school when he was my principal. And there's probably some truth in that, because I was always at school or doing something else. And it made me think a little bit about it, because he's principal at Centerville-Abingtong Junior High right now. And so he has a little different perspective on it, which I never thought about. So. But yeah, I wish that we could get more kids involved in it. My brother-in-law works for IU Bloomington, and he goes around trying to recruit high school kids to be teachers. And he says it's tough. It's just plain tough to try to get students to be even willing to come down and talk to him. You know, it's like and I think too, teaching used to be more fun for kids and teachers. When we started, like I said, there was no testing. I do model legislature where kids write bills, they pass bills, we go to the State House. This is for 5 area schools. And I had somebody from Indiana Department of Ed come and visit about 5 years ago, and they said, this is a great program. Kids are actually applying knowledge and they're debating and they have to know and do research. And they said, well, this needs to be replicated throughout the state. And I said, yeah, and then you guys will test it. and then we won't have a program anymore. So, and I don't blame IDOE for that, it's the legislature. But I understand you have to have some form of testing to measure learning and all that. But this stuff of testing for hours and days and weeks has just gone too far.
So
and then now
what do we in the community need to know? What do we need to be talking to our legislators about? Because some of it is mandated from the state, some of it from the federal government, but some of it from the state. If we are going to get back to a point where teaching is fun, learning is just that. It is not remembering something you can put on a test, but learning is true learning. What do we need to know that we don't understand as residents that we need to be talking about, that we need to be asking about? How do we fix this?
Well, and I think that's part of the problem. There are so many layers of this, it's hard to get to it. You know, if you talk to, Senator Rotz or Barrett, Representative Barrett, they will say, well, we have to have testing because it's mandated by the federal government, which is true. So a lot of that, we have our hands tied. Now, to what degree of testing, I'm not sure. A lot of the colleges are dropping SATs to even get in.
Right.
They're saying it's not a very good indicator of success, really. And it's discriminatory against certain groups of people. Yeah. And so here the colleges are dropping SAT tests to get in. They're looking more at your overall grade point average, what classes you've taken, and so on, which makes sense. And yet we're still saying you have to have all this mandated testing all the way through from grade 3 on. And it's a lot of pressure for kids. I can't imagine what it's like to be a third grader sitting in there and facing these tests, fourth grader, for weeks and weeks on end, let alone a high school kid that has to do it. So it is a layered problem because the federals say one thing and then the state comes through and then they change it all the time too. That's another problem. They don't leave things alone. I told a group of superintendents back in December when legislature was meeting, I wish they just pass a law that there's no education bills for 4 years. Just let us live with what we've got and do the best we can and stop throwing bills in. The amount of training that teachers have to have every year is before school even starts is unbelievable. Whether it's CPR or whatever, it's just more things that they have to do. And I'm not saying that's not important, but some of that stuff doesn't really have to be done every year. So a lot of it is you got a great point. I'm not sure where it starts, but a lot of people would just say, well, that's their problem and what we can't really do anything about it. And I think it's got to be addressed at some time. They've just got to stop a lot of these bills that they're passing. And but it does start, like you said, at the root level. And I think I've listened to some of the shows, your show, we're interviewing the legislators and so on. And I think they are aware of the problem. It's just too much of the time they follow the party line and not what their common sense is sometimes. That's my personal opinion.
You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, talking with Phil Stevenson, Superintendent of Centerville-Abingtong Schools. I'm going to go back to a discussion, if you don't mind. Talked a little bit earlier about what might happen if the state's money gets a little funny around October, November. Talk about your belief. Would it be possible for Wayne County to have one public school system, not closing any buildings, not renaming any schools? Centerville-Abingtong is still Centerville-Abingtong. Western Wayne, Lincoln Elementary, Lincoln is still that. Hagerstown, Nettle Creek still has their schools, but there's one overarching school board. There's one overarching superintendent, assistant superintendent. As you say, you have 92 graduates this year. Lincoln probably has about that many, maybe not a lot more. I've watched Richmond because I've had 2 girls come through there 8 years apart, and there's probably been a drop of 250 kids between one daughter and the next daughter. As we're not seeing our populations grow, our school systems continue to get smaller. Why is that such a bad idea? And I ask it as someone who came from a high school district that had 3 separate high schools within that district. We didn't even play necessarily in the same conference, so we're not even talking about changing that. Why is that something that would not work here?
Well, you could. I think, though, that they're looking at, that's what they talked about last fall. Well, we'll just have one school board and one superintendent, and then we'll have 15 assistant superintendents. And I think you lose, when you do that, you do lose your local control. I've been at Centerville long enough, almost everybody calls me about everything. And that's true in your local district, because you only have one superintendent. then most of us have at least one assistant superintendent. But look how many Richmond has at their size. You know, they've got director of elementary curriculum, director of secondary curriculum, and you go on and on. From what we've seen, you're not saving anything, but you are making it harder for people to, I guess, have an influence on their school boards within the local communities. So I think that is where you know, because of the fact that now our enrollment at Centerville continues to grow, but it probably will level off in a few years. So we're not quite like the other districts, because 33% of our students come from other schools, and that is a draw. But
hasn't that ended up just pitting public schools against each other, though? I mean, it is in the overall big picture of public education, is that really a win? Because you're probably getting most of your students that transfer in from another public school, who then has to go try to get kids from another public school. I mean, as public education goes, is there a win there?
Well, you know, for many years, Centerville didn't even take transfer students, and at that time, if you did take them, they had to pay money to go there. But now you're reimbursed by the state.
Right.
Yes, if it's not handled correctly, you could become an adversary with another district. Now, we don't drive our buses into other districts. Some of the districts in Wayne County do that. They're actually driving their buses into a neighboring town and picking students up. So we keep our buses in that range. And we're not out there advertising about it. We just started taking students probably about 6 years ago, because we didn't have room, but we've had a couple additions. One thing that it does irritate some people in our district is that the people that are attending those schools don't pay property taxes. So we're getting ready to add on 15 classrooms to Centerville-Abingtong Elementary. It's a $10 million project, but the people paying for it are the people who live in Center and Abington townships. Those other people that are coming in from other students coming in from other schools, their parents aren't paying for one brick. So there is that contention too. But on the other hand, if we didn't take those students, and you're right, other than a small housing addition on the north side of Centerville, which is helping a lot, our enrollment's going down because we have an aging population. But if we didn't have kids come in from other schools, we wouldn't have the opportunities for a lot of programs that we currently offer. So there is that point too. But yeah, I think the major problem with, and it's a selling point, well, we'll keep your high school. It's just that all the money and the control will now be spread out between everybody in Wayne County. And I have a feeling everybody knows where that most of that control will be, because there is one large elephant in Wayne County, and it's called Richmond. So I think that's what happens. So when you look at it, and you would add probably, since Richmond's probably about twice the size of the other four corporations, you would have to add twice as many people to the administration office as you currently have in Richmond, just to get the same thing done. And from what we've been able to study on that, you're going to lose money. Because right now, I do the budgets along with my assistant and our treasurer. We don't have a room full of budget people. You just wear so many hats. And that's probably why you don't have a lot of people, wanting to be a superintendent. But, I'm the one that drives the roads. I'm getting a little old for that, but this is my last year. That's all I know.
There you go. But you're going out on a high note. I understand that you're the Indiana Association Public School Superintendent of the Year for District or Region 6.
Yeah, you know that, huh? Yeah, I think they felt sorry for me after so many years. They thought it's time to send him out on a good note, but I was honored to be. So it was voted on. So I ran against four others. I don't know who not. I didn't know I was up for running until the ballot came out. But and I was selected 2014 for the same thing. Maybe this time I have a better chance of winning the state. I think it's a little bit of a humorous in a way because the competition for state superintendent of the year is in December, and I've already would have been retired for about 5 months. So I don't think I've got much of a chance there, but maybe I do. I don't know.
We're down to our last few minutes. I'm
Oh,
curious,
okay.
as you kind of look back on your career in education here in Wayne County, talk about a couple of things that really kind of jump out at you that you will remember, good and bad. A couple of things that you've seen change that you go, wow, wish that hadn't changed, or some things that you've seen change that you went, that was really good.
Well, I think the worst thing, and I've had to do it twice at Centerville as superintendent, it was probably the worst thing I've ever done is when you have to reduce staff. It's called riffing, reduction, and that is tough to do. You know, you bring people in. The first time I did it, I was riffing people at the high school that I had begged to come and teach there. And then 4 years later, we have budget cuts, and then I have to riff them, reduction in force. And it's tough to do. That was one of the worst things I've ever had to do that way. On the positive note, I really enjoy seeing former students that are now, most of them, grandparents at Centerville, or if I run into them. And it's, I go to ball games, and it's nice seeing everybody. They always have fond memories, particularly when of the classroom or something we did when I was principal or so on. That's really rewarding. You go eat somewhere and you run into people like that you've had in school, and many times they'll say, are you still working and all that, and you still there at the school? And unfortunately, many of them I don't remember. And so I usually say, now let me try to guess what decade I had you in, because, I span 4 decades. So I try to guess by decade who they are and all that. But it's been a very rewarding experience, both with the colleagues I've worked with over the years, both teachers and administrators. And of course, the reason why you're in teaching is with the kids. I'm proud of the fact that I've been still sponsor of the Eastern Indiana Model Legislature since 1973. And it lasts from August to October in the fall. And I still hope I can do that this year. I hope the virus won't keep me from it. But I really enjoy getting in there and working with the kids. And the young kids, it's funny, they don't know what a superintendent is. So a lot of them just call me mayor. They don't know what I am. I don't know, a lot of people, they'll call me mayor or something like that. It's funny what the little kids will say. But I have enjoyed very much working with the model legislature and keeping contact with the students. I think that's been a really good piece. And in February, early February this year, the State House passed a resolution for my years of contribution working with Model Edge and with my family being so involved in education, and that was real nice. Yes, I have nothing but fond memories. I just hope down the road, I won't be a part of it, but I will feel for whoever if they have to make cuts, any kind of cuts, whether it's programming cuts or whatever. But hopefully we can get through this thing and make it through. So I really appreciate working with you and knowing you over the years. And I emailed the board last night and I said I'm going to be on In Focus, and probably be my last time they'll have me on there. So I said this will be my last interview, hopefully.
No, not hardly, because I'm going to need someone when we're talking with legislators who can speak to them and come up with questions for them that actually make some sense, because I'm not an educator. I didn't spend time in it, and I'm not going to try to pretend like I have. So I like to lean on people who I know have that background. So
this is the arm twisting. You got me here on TV. I have no other choice but say yes. I get the feeling.
There you go. You're going to be my
He's manipulated me here on this one, I'll tell you.
So what are you going? We've got about a minute left. What are you going to do? What are your plans? Are you a golfer? Are you a hobbyist? What are you going to do?
I have no hobbies except school. So I do have a lot of things. I want to try to enjoy reading again, history, which is I was a social studies teacher. So I do want to get back into just enjoying reading for fun, not just education stuff. And my wife and I are planning to travel quite a bit, but I still want to be involved in the community, and I still am hoping I can still do model legislature with the kids. I just don't want to walk away from that. And anytime the school wants me to help out, of course, I'm going to volunteer and do that. So I'm going to keep plenty busy. I'm on a lot of boards, WCTV board. So CIS board, they still want me to be on that. I think the CIS state board still wants me to be on that. So I'm going to be busy enough. I don't want to be tied down enough. I can't do what my wife and I want to try to do, some traveling and that kind of thing. So,
Phil Stevenson, I appreciate the time. Thanks for being on this week's In Focus.
I appreciate you taking the time to interview me again. So, but anyway, I do appreciate it. I do.
No problem. Take care.
Okay.